A big fight in Washington this week about drawing the lines that are going to determine who goes to Washington. At issue, an old practice called gerrymandering. Now, both parties, they do it. They look at voter rolls to find groups of voters more likely to support their candidates. So you end up with districts that look like this. Districts that seem to challenge basic math skills, or as some have called them, crimes against geography. Now, both parties, they've admitted to gerrymandering for political advantage, of course. But the question for the Supreme Court this week is political gerrymandering unconstitutional? Well, the justice heard arguments on Tuesday about the district maps in Maryland and North Carolina. Maryland maps favoring Democrats, the ones in North Carolina favoring Republicans. And for more on the case and on gerrymandering itself, we turn to David Daley. He is senior fellow for Fairvote, and he is also the author of Rat Effed, Why Your Vote Does Not Count. David, as always, I appreciate it for you. Thank you.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me, Richard.
Well, let's get right to the high court here. You're not overly optimistic that Justice Roberts, who looks to be the swing vote in this, is going to put his neck on the line.
Well, the courts over the years have been really skeptical, especially Justice Roberts, of trying to involve themselves in partisan disputes over maps. The courts don't want to justify their own reputation for independence by, getting in the middle of partisan fights over maps that favor Republicans or maps that favor Democrats.
The thinking, though, was maybe because you had, in effect, a nonpartisan, you had one Democrat and one Republican example before them, that they wouldn't be, in effect, tilting the balance for one or the other. This would be more of a blanket statement. If they were ever going to decide this, it would be now. But you don't think it's a distinction with a difference?
Well, I think it's extremely important. I mean, gerrymandering is one of the serious problems in our democracy. And what we saw at the court this week was that even Justice Kavanaugh, who I think this shocked a lot of people, that Justice Kavanaugh immediately recognized the importance of gerrymandering and the way that these tilted maps affect representative democracy. And I think you're exactly right. I think the fact that because one of these maps was drawn by Republicans to favor themselves. That's North Carolina. Republicans there have admitted that the entire purpose of the map was to entrench themselves a 10-3 majority, and that has in fact stood up across this entire decade. And in Maryland, Democrats turned the 6th congressional district there inside out. They moved 320,000 people in and out of that district in order to take what had been a safe Republican district, and they turned it into a big Democratic district. And both the Chief Justice and Justice Kavanaugh live in Maryland. So now they've experienced firsthand what it's like to be in a gerrymandered district, and they were singing a little bit of a different tune this week.
You know, you did, I saw a piece that you wrote in Salon which puts kind of a perfect face on this. Mark Meadows, the Freedom Caucus, Republican from North Carolina, and I will editorialize for a moment, pound for pound, one of the biggest crazies in Washington. But anyway, he represents a district in North Carolina, Asheville, which is as progressive as you're going to find in the Tar Heel State. But somehow, some way, this guy who's right of Attila Hun is, as you said in your title, representing a city full of vegans and liberals. Talk about, how this is just Exhibit A when it comes to why it is a crime against democracy, this whole gerrymandering.
Well, this is how you gerrymander. You do it in one of two ways, either by cracking the other side's votes, by splitting a town like Asheville in half, and then diluting those votes and making them part of two other districts that are more conservative, or by packing their votes and taking a state like Maryland and packing all the Republicans and drawing some wild lines that stick all of them into one district. In North Carolina, what they did was they cracked Asheville in half. They drew a line right down the middle of it and created two conservative districts, and the folks in Asheville essentially have no say at all. I went down there and actually ran a gerrymander 5K along the lines of Mark Meadows' district, and you have to be careful to not sprain your ankle. Those lines are so sharp, and they just go down one side of the street and up the other. But I mean, what gerrymandering really does is it creates these districts that are no longer competitive, and it creates districts in which the only election that really matters is in the party primary. And a party primary is a base election. What you end up with are people like Mark Meadows, who actually ran his race in 2012 and said, I'm going to send Barack Obama back to Kenya or wherever it is he comes from. He rides a real birther campaign into representing this city of vegan cafes and independent bookstores, and it tilts our entire democracy. When you draw districts like this, Mark Meadows ends up being the kind of guy who affects all of our politics nationally. It's Mark Meadows who files the motion to vacate the chair that forces John Boehner out of the Speaker of the House and installs Paul Ryan. It is Mark Meadows who forces the 2013 government shutdown. So this affects all of us. It gets rid of politicians who might be willing to compromise. That district in Asheville, when it was kept together as one city, it was represented by a conservative Democrat, one of the most conservative Democrats in the entire House. And that's what gerrymandering does. It gets rid of liberal Republicans. It gets rid of conservative Democrats. It pushes our politics wildly towards the extreme. It's bad for democracy.
And finally, David, it does not have to be this way, and it's not that complicated to solve. Real briefly, say that if we actually had the Supreme Court, stick their neck out here, as I said, and do the right thing, there is a remedy to this, right?
Oh, absolutely. The trouble is, politicians aren't going to do it. And that's why we need the courts to step in, because the citizens' interests are the ones here that need protecting from the politicians. There are lots of states that have shown a way forward on this. California has a terrific independence commission. It's actually citizens there who get together and draw their lines. In Iowa, it's the job of nonpartisan state bureaucrats who both sides trust, and they can't use partisan political data, and they draw lines that make sense, and they're always more competitive. When Democrats took back the House of Representatives this year, they did so by winning the competitive seats that were drawn by commissions and courts nationwide. They're always fairer districts when it's not the politicians themselves, the self-interested folks who are drawing their own lines and choosing their own voters.
Well, we will look very curiously what the Supreme Court will do here, but it's certainly an overdue issue finally needing to be resolved. David, I appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time.
Okay, when we come back, we're going to talk a little baseball here. Opening day, we're going to tell you on how all your local teams did, and we'll go live to Yankee Stadium as the Yankees threw out the first pitch earlier this afternoon.